Thank you for joining us today for this important side event on the human rights situation in Egypt. Our discussion will assess the implementation of the 2019 recommendations issued by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights ahead of the Commission's upcoming consideration of Egypt's report later this week. This conversation also takes place at a critical time. On October 22nd, 2025, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met with EU leaders in Brussels for the first ever EU-Egypt summit, marking the launch of a strategic and comprehensive partnership. Despite being framed around shared stability and prosperity, Egyptians continue to face systematic repression, targeted control over civil society and media, and widespread violations of economic and social rights. With the release of activist Ali Abdel Fattah after 6 years of unjust detention and a limited review of the Code of Criminal Procedures were welcomed, these steps remain utterly symbolic. Authorities have referred more than 6,000 people to terrorism-related trials only in 2025, many for nothing more than exercising their basic rights. Reports of enforced disappearances, torture, extrajudicial killings, and even mass graves in North Sinai continue under near total impunity, and we will address that by the speakers present today. At the same time, despite over 15 billion USDs in international financing between 2024 and 2025, the government has failed to meet constitutional spending targets on health and education, leaving millions of Egyptians in poverty amid austerity measures and soaring living costs. Today's panel will address these realities, from civil and political rights violations to the erosion of economic and social rights, and will help us reflect on how African mechanisms can respond effectively to the situation. As the African Commission prepares to review Egypt's record, we call on African states and human rights defenders present today to ensure that Egypt's obligations under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights are not treated as optional. The African system must remain a collective shield for the people of this continent, ensuring that political partnership never comes at the expense of justice, accountability, and the dignity of whose rights are being violated. We will start with our first speaker today, Ahmed Atallah, who will address the detention conditions and the situation of the application of the death penalty in Egypt. You have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Atallah. I am the Executive Director of Egyptian Front for Human Rights. I'll start talking about the death penalty. So we have been monitoring since 2018 the situation of the death penalty in Egypt, and we can say clearly that Egypt keeps violating its obligation under the African Charter for Human Rights, especially the Article 4 related to the right to the life and the Article 5 related to the freedom from the torture. So I'll start with the numbers. In 2024 alone, Egyptian courts sentenced at least 380 people to death across 255 cases, including 16 citizens tried in 5 cases involving allegation of political violence. During the same year, 35 death sentences were upheld, 3 of them in cases related to political violence, and 13 executions were carried out. These figures place that Egypt among the countries with highest numbers of executions and reveal a deep reliance on the death penalty, particularly in politically motivated cases, many of which were marked by unfair trials. It's worth noting also that these sentences are issued under an extensively broad legal framework, at least 104 articles across various laws allow for the death penalty, including the Penal Code, Anti-Terrorism Law, the Drug Control Law, and other laws. On the other hand, these executions happened with reports of unfair trial, torture, enforced disappearance, and forced confessions, particularly in cases involving political violence. On the other hand, regarding the detention conditions in Egypt, and based on the fact that since 2021, the government built new prisons, like part of them like prison complexes, accompanied by a propaganda campaign by the government claiming that these new prisons would improve the detention conditions. After years of transferring detainees from the old facilities to these new facilities, the questions now arises as to whether these prisons have led to real improvement in detainees' rights or not. So from extensive documentations with families and former detainees in 5 new prisons, we are talking about Badr 1, Badr 3, Wadi Natrun, and the 10th of Ramadan for women and men. It can be said that structure upgrades have not translated into better conditions in terms of many issues as follows. We have documented like unsafe water, inadequate ventilation, medical neglect, essential medicines and food are often denied from entering to the prisons, especially in Badr 3 prison. We have also documenting preventing students from taking exams. Also, we have documenting that the visitation rights remain severely restricted, including bans on bringing food and books to detainees, as I mentioned previously. Also, the new prisons are remote. We are talking, for example, Badr 3 or Badr 1. It's like 1 hour from Cairo, like the old Cairo, which is hard to access from families or lawyers. And also, it was documented that there is also violation of privacy by ongoing electronic surveillance, and also the bright lighting 24 hours in the cells, worsening the mental health of detainees. We have also documented the use of solitary confinement and torture as punishment for protests. When we talk about the protests inside the prison, we are talking about the hunger strikes that take place, like resulting from this kind of violations, and also from all of this previous practice, we can say that that most of this violations, especially this medical negligence, lead to like this custody. We monitored in 2025 only up to October that at least 42 detainees dead in several detention facilities. We are talking 9 out of this number already dead in the new prisons. As also I mentioned that this kind of violation lead to several hunger strikes and suicide attempts that took place in the prison, and also sometimes in the courts, protesting against these violations. So regarding, quick mention to the women detainees' rights, also they face the same harsh conditions. The case of Hoda Abdel Menaim, a prominent human rights lawyer, and also a former member in National Human Rights Council, which is detained since 2018. Actually, she faced a lot of violations, like denying from adequate health care despite serious health problems, and remains imprisoned following an unfair trial before an emergency court. And after she finished her sentences, actually was rotated on 2 cases, and she's still in prison so far. At the end, we can clearly say that these new prisons replicate the same patterns of violations found in the older facilities, and also prioritize also the government seems that it prioritize image and construction over the genuine reform and respect for the detainees' rights. Even though they are new building, we can say clearly that the same punishment philosophy persists, applied by the same prisons officers. And I'll give the floor to the other colleagues to add something. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for this key picture on the detention conditions. And prisons are only one tool among the repression practices that Egypt is employing. We go to our second speaker, Ilef, who will elaborate more on the patterns and practices of enforced disappearances, torture, and extrajudicial executions in Egypt.
Thank you, Maysa. My name is Ilaf Qassab. I'm the MENA Human Rights Advisor at the World Organization Against Torture. And in my intervention, I will focus on 4 linked problems: enforced disappearance, torture, arbitrary detention, and fair trial violations. These are not isolated issues. They are a single repressive system that has not changed since the Commission's 2019 recommendations. The Commission told Egypt what to do. The state accepted most recommendations on paper, but the problem is follow-up, as usual. The laws and practices that enable disappearance and torture remain in practice, and the authorities kept the tools and stopped the remedies. First, the state claims all detainees are in official facilities with access to lawyers and families in its state report. Civil society data, on the other hand, shows the opposite. Up until today, the total number of disappearances has far exceeded 4,000 since 2015. Families report abduction by security agents, prolonged incommunicado detention, and then a sudden reappearance before the Supreme State security prosecution and terrorism circuits, often after torture. Unfortunately, some are still disappeared until today. Yet, Egypt has not criminalized enforced disappearance and refused to ratify the convention, the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, as recommended by the African Commission. Second, Egypt's constitution and laws pay lip service to prohibitions, but they do not match practice. Egyptian NGOs, including the colleagues here, document dozens of new torture incidents and many custodial deaths every year. Methods reported include beatings, electric shocks, sexual violence, forced rest positions, isolations, and medical neglect. The Penal Code still defines torture only narrowly as acts to extract confessions. That narrow definition blocks effective prosecution of perpetrators and keeps senior officials outside accountability. International experts, including the Committee Against Torture and the Human Rights Committee, have repeatedly concluded since 1996 and up until 2023 that torture in Egypt is systematic and widespread. A legal analysis conducted by Redress and other international and national NGOs concluded that torture in Egypt may amount to a crime against humanity. And yet, no credible national investigation or prosecution of senior officials has followed those findings. Third, the legal architecture is structured in ways that concentrate power. The amendments of the Constitution and laws on judicial appointments that took place in the previous years have weakened judicial independence. Terrorism circuits and state security prosecutions operate with broad discretion. In 2024 alone, terrorism courts issued tens of thousands of detention renewal orders. Okay. In 2024 alone, terrorism courts issued tens of thousands of detention renewal orders, often without release or meaningful judicial scrutiny. Mass trials keep large groups of defendants convicted on the basis of coerced confessions. military courts still try civilians in cases that should be in the ordinary system. The rotation of cases defined as the opening of new identical terrorism files to extend detention is routine. This practice denies judicial reviews and effectively creates indefinite detention. One example that my colleague Ahmed has already cited is that of lawyer Huda Abdel Manam, who finished a 5-year sentence in 2023 only to be rotated into a new terrorism case. And the same happens to hundreds of detainees, allowing indefinite imprisonment with no judicial oversight. All of these practices violate at least Articles 5, 6, and 7 of the African Charter, and they directly undermine the Commission's prior recommendations on judicial reform and on ending military trials for civilians. So, how do these 4 problems connect? Enforced disappearance creates the space for torture, because victims are held outside meaningful oversight. Torture produces the confessions that feed mass trials and allow prosecutors to argue for continued detention. The anti-torture framework codifies those elements by offering broad, vague definitions and excessive powers. So the result is a cycle. We have a legal framework that permits abuse, an investigative system that protects perpetrators, and a court system that validates tainted evidence. That cycle is the lived reality the ACHPR sought to dismantle in 2019, but it still runs. What the state promised and what citizens see do not match. In 2019, the Commission recommended criminalizing enforced disappearance, revising the definition of torture, ending the misuse of anti-torture laws, ensuring independent investigations, and allowing access to detention centers. Egypt has not implemented those measures in any meaningful way. The victims keep accumulating, the families keep waiting. The following are a set of demands and recommendations to restore any hope of accountability. Thus, Egypt must criminalize enforced disappearance and ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance and the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, amend the Penal Code to adopt the full international definition of torture, thus the Article 1 of the Convention Against Torture definition, and remove the confession-only limitation, suspend the routine use of incommunicado detentions, remote renewals, and rotations of cases, and guarantee immediate access to counsel and family, and the use of emergency and terrorism-only courts for ordinary criminal matters, and restore judicial independence in appointments and oversight, establish an independent, empowered investigative mechanism with prosecutorial capacity to investigate enforced disappearance, torture, and custodial deaths, and ensure victims access to victim justice and redress, and finally, to grant the ACHPR and UN mandate holders full access to all detention facilities, including Badr and Wadi Natrun, and publish disaggregated detainee statistics. Finally, just to be clear, my intervention is not about political point scoring. This is about the African Charter's core guarantees. When the state accepts recommendations and then keeps the toolbox that produces the abuses, the Commission's authority and the Charter's protections erode. The Commission must insist on concrete timelines, verification visits, and a mechanism to monitor implementation. Because if we allow another review cycle to pass without that, the words of this room will remain empty to the families who wait at prison gates. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elif. Yes, it deserves an applause, honestly. We move to our next speaker, Mohamed Lotfi, who will address the erosion of economic and social rights in Egypt and the reality of minorities living there. You have the floor.
Thank you. Very quickly, going through the economic and social rights, Egypt has constitutional percentages of the GDP to be spent on education, health, housing, higher education. However, what we have noticed is that over the past 10 years, Egypt has not reached the 3% GDP government spending over education. We notice also on the health, 3% over health, and Egypt has not reached yet the 5% over education. So Egypt is roughly at half that amount of spending. What is worrying is that we see a trend over the past 10 years that these percentages of the GDP are not increasing. They're actually staggering, sometimes even declining. And therefore, Egypt is actually regressing on the realization of economic and social rights when it comes to the right to health and the right to education. When it comes to the right to housing, there is a latest development. It has to do with amendments to the law that allowed fixed rent. Fixed rent was fashionable back in the 60s to stabilize the housing situation of the many poor of the country. And so this law was amended following a constitutional court sentence that said that some of the provisions were not constitutional. Anyway, now within 7 years, about 1.7 million families will have to find alternative housing. Within 7 years from now, 1.7 million families will have to find alternative housing in the market, which is completely unaffordable for such families are mainly made of pensioners who have been living for all their lives, or their kids who are now living there. So social stability may be at stake. And we have seen some protests and gatherings by families who live in such old rent flats in Cairo. We have seen one of the lawyers actually arrested and disappeared for a few days because he went on TV to speak on behalf of those families. And it's a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game. Some areas in Cairo are mixed confessions, or communally mixed. An area like Shubra is 50% Christian Coptics and 50% Muslims. And communal violence in Egypt happens over small fights between neighbors, as Sadat has rightly noticed back in the past. And we fear maybe a situation where a tenant is Christian and the owner of the flat is Muslim, or the opposite, may take a community down the path of violence over housing and security of the family. Obviously, evictions and forced evictions continue to happen widely for big projects, on public projects like roads and other mega structures that the government establishes and likes to show in a glossy way. Those who pay the price of those evictions are the very poor of the big cities, who are pushed out of the center of the city to the fringes in social housing that are higher rent than what they pay currently. When it comes to environmental rights, Egypt is still back and very, how we call it, behind when it comes to protection of the environment. Many areas in the south of Egypt suffer from polluting industries such as fertilizers plants in Asyut, Manqabad, in Aswan, Azbit al-Busta, There are many areas where the communities who live near the Nile, who are farmers, fishermen, lose their jobs or lose their health because of the pollution of the Nile as a result of those fertilizers. And we have litigated against some of those fertilizers plants, litigated against the government, the Ministry of Environment, because the Ministry of Environment is the one that's supposed to make sure that those plants abide by the environmental law in Egypt. However, most of the time those don't do that, and it is the poorest who suffer the economic consequences of this and health consequences of this for the sake of big profit. When it comes to minorities' rights, Egypt is a very plural society. You might think of Egypt as a very Muslim country, but it is actually a very diverse society. There is a large Coptic community in Egypt, Coptic Christian community in Egypt, Orthodox, Protestants, Catholics. There is a handful of Jewish ladies, actually over 50 and over 60 years old. That's the remaining community of Jews in Egypt who have stayed in Egypt. We have Baha'is, Shias, Ahmadis, Jehovah's Witnesses, but also atheists. So Egypt is very plural in that sense. However, even the Egyptian constitution does not recognize the right to practice. It recognizes the right to belief to all, which is great, but it doesn't. It only recognizes the right to practice heavenly religion. That's Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And Islam understood as Sunni Islam only, not even Sufi Islam or Shia Islam or the other sects of Islam that exist. And therefore, we see a lot of harassment and arrests and the limitation and obstacles to and discrimination against Baha'is, Shias, Ahmadi, Nuri Ahmadi, atheists, and other sects of Islam, who are so often accused of contempt of religion. That's Article 98F of the Penal Code, which has been consistently used by prosecutors in Egypt to punish or arrest or try converts from Islam to Christianity, but also other minorities, religious minorities who have promoted Quranis, for example, have also been harassed and arrested and detained on the back of such accusations. And so the constitution in Egypt was supposed to establish, provides for the establishment of an anti-discrimination commission. The constitution from 2014. We're now 11 years later. 11 years later, we have not had an anti-discrimination commission, which is a shame because it would serve many purposes, not just for religious minorities, but also for sexual minorities and was also discrimination based on gender. And so, recommendations. Number one, the establishment of the anti-discrimination commission. Two, the abrogation or the cancellation of this Article 98F of the Penal Code that allows for persecution based on this accusation of contempt of religion, and a unified law on religious buildings or places of worship, so that Christians, like Muslims and other confession, can practice their religion in the place of worship without discrimination based on bureaucracy, licensing restrictions, but also equality in treatment of Muslims and Christians and other confessions when it comes to conversion from religion. In Egypt, you can convert from Christianity to Islam, and civil servants would applaud you and take you and hug you and immediately establish in the civil registry that you have become a fellow Muslim. But if you are Muslim and you want to convert to Christianity, good luck. They consider this as an impious or a sin to do, and you cannot, as a Muslim, convert to Christianity. Baha'is cannot bury their dead. They are not a recognized religion, heavenly religions, and so Baha'is have been struggling just to get burial places for the dead ones in their community. When it comes to economic and social rights, back to recommendations have to do with increasing the budget percentage of the GDP on housing, health, and education to meet the constitutional. Obviously, it cannot be immediate, but at least to be on the right track to reach the constitutionally provided spending percentages. But also application of the environmental law on polluting industries and provision of alternative housing to pensioners and the poorest sectors of society and segments of society so that they can afford housing, social housing, within the 7 years time frame provided by the law. On women, obviously I mentioned the anti-discrimination committee, but we see often loss of jobs by women in sectors such as education and health, specifically because of those cuts in government spending, and also discrimination in employment of women based on the fact that they might go on maternity leave or etc. And so we see discriminatory practices by private sector and even public sector in employing women. That's something that needs to be addressed very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Amr Magdi from Human Rights Watch, who will address the compelling evidence that have emerged that implicates the Egyptian government and its military in the commission of potentially crimes against humanity in Sinai. You have the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Maisa. My name is Amr Magdi. I am a senior researcher with the organization Human Rights Watch, but I'm also here presenting and representing also the director of the board in the Sinai Foundation for Human Rights. We did a joint submission in lieu of a shadow report for the Egypt review on the occasion of Egypt review in the current session in the African Commission. So I will zoom in on Sinai, which is a peninsula in the northeast of Egypt. What has been happening and described, the violations described by my colleagues in mainland Egypt, when it comes to Sinai, I would say it has been multiplied by hundreds. For example, as you will hear from me in this presentation, in mainland Egypt, people, of course, there are mass arbitrary arrests everywhere in every single city in Egypt, but many of those arrested get detained secretly and forced disappearance. But in Sinai, it's by default, every single one arrested is forcibly disappeared. There's no chance a person will be held and their location will be known to their family. So what happened in Sinai? After the military coup in July 2013, a war escalated very quickly between a small militant group that pledged allegiance to ISIS, Islamic State, in 2014, and the Egyptian government forces, mainly the military, but also the police, and some pro-army militias consisting of local men who actually were armed to assist the military in their fight against ISIS. We believe this war continued from 2013 until roughly the end of 2022. That was the last recorded attack by this militant group that's called Wilayat Sina. And we believe that hostilities actually rose to the level of a non-international armed conflict given the intensity, the sheer size of troops, military troops used in the fight, and the presence of organized command chain on both sides fighting. During this war, both sides committed extremely serious abuses that brutalized the local Sinai population. The Egyptian military and police and the pro-army militias that were supporting them have been involved in mass arbitrary arrests. We're talking about thousands of people in a population that is already relatively small, around 500,000 people. Almost all of those have actually been forcibly disappeared for weeks, months, or years in unofficial, mostly in unofficial military sites, but some of them in non-military sites. Many of them were abused, tortured, but also some of them have been removed from their detention sites and killed in field executions in cold blood. Many have been civilians sent to military trials that also include many children. Thousands of families have been evicted during the course of the fight from their homes and farms, particularly from 2015 onwards. We are talking about almost 150,000 people who've been forcibly evicted by the military from their homes and villages, mostly, or a lot of them, without just compensation, or sometimes without any sort of compensation, and also without any assistance. When those people were evicted from their homes, they had to find and arrange for carrying their furniture, sometimes in very primitive ways, on donkey-pulled carts and so on. The military didn't offer any assistance for those innocent and simple people to actually find new homes and new sources of income. The entire city of Rafah has been razed. Many villages in Sheikh Zayed have been razed, and some of these demolitions are still ongoing in Al Arish and Bir Al Abd. Some of these demolitions have been conducted based on oral, verbal statements or orders by President Sisi and other officials, without even a single written decree that regulates how these and what compensation are they entitled for. This ISIS militants, on the other side, committed also horrifying abuses, including abducting and executing civilians, and they have also been responsible for the largest single violent attack in Egypt's history. That was on Al Rawda Mosque in Al Arish city, near Al Arish city, that killed over 300 mosque goers in 2017. Basically, residents of Sinai have been crushed between the unlawful conduct of the military and the ISIS fighters. But actually, adhering to laws and regulations is what should distinguish law enforcement. We call them law enforcement, for God's sake. Law enforcement, security forces, and unlawful groups and extremists, whatever you want to call them. I want to zoom in on the abuse of extrajudicial executions. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Sinai Foundation for Human Rights, and among others, have documented over the past few years several incidents of extrajudicial killings, basically field executions of people detained in Sinai. For example, in January 2017, the Interior Ministry released a video, propaganda video, showing what they claimed to be a raid on a terrorist hideout in Al Arish city in North Sinai that resulted in the killing of 10 people. Ironically, analysis of this official video shows that it has been completely edited and fabricated. The raiding commandos, when they are approaching the house, for example, there is very strong illumination that's usually used in cinema production that will never be used in a real scenario of a security raid over a house. The first guy murdered in the video is kneeling on his knees and his hands are behind his back. Probably he was handcuffed before he was killed. The video shows that all bodies have been removed, as indicated by the pools of blood in the video, and so on and so forth. But it's not just the video. after the Interior Ministry released this video, actually it sparked rare spontaneous protests in Al Arish city by local residents, because simply at least 6 of those 10 people murdered have been reported to be detained for months. Some of them were even taken before the eyes of their own families and kids. Even a member of the government, or the official body for human rights in Egypt, the National Council of Human Rights, Dr. Salah Salam, said that 6 people of those killed were actually, their names were submitted to a committee to demand their release. So even the government acknowledges that those people were released and killed in detention, were detained and killed in detention. Following our state, the Human Rights Watch commented on this and showed how those people were killed in extrajudicial executions. I think Amnesty did the same, and after that, the security forces, the authorities never published again any single video revealing what they call extrajudicial executions. According to military statements, the official Facebook page of the military spokesperson, Sinai Foundation conducted a survey collecting all the statements from 2013 to 2022 and found that the military claimed they have killed over 5,000 people in Sinai during the course of the war and detained almost 15,000 people. But when you compare these numbers to the actual estimated number of militants in Sinai, most experts believe this was a very relatively small group that was also a very local phenomenon. So ISIS in Sinai was unlike Syria or Iraq. It was not joined by foreign fighters. It was mostly a local phenomenon inside, and it was pretty much isolated. And most experts believe they were those fighters between 1,500 to 2,000 people. But the military says they arrested 15,000 people and killed almost 5,000 people. In so many statements by the military across the hostilities and the conduct of military operations, they also claimed that they killed a lot of people in clashes. But many of those claimed allegedly to be killed in clashes were actually detained, removed secretly from their detention sites, and killed and murdered in cold blood after being blindfolded and handcuffed. The very important development is really a groundbreaking report by the Sinai Foundation released last month that documents for the first time ever, in cooperation with Forensic Architecture, which is an independent organization in the UK, the presence of a mass grave in Al Arish, where it's believed that hundreds of people have been killed and buried secretly by the military in those extrajudicial executions. The revelation happened through 2 militia members, 2 of the members of the militias that were supporting the military. They gave testimonies to the Sinai Foundation that led to the discovery of the location of this mass grave site, even though those militia members denied participating in the killings, but they gave powerful testimonies that many innocent civilians were killed in those sites and buried secretly. The team of the Sinai Foundation managed, even though it's extremely fortified military site, they managed to visit the site and do some superficial excavations, revealing human remains of 36 bodies at least. But the estimate is that at least over 300 people were buried in that site, mostly superficially. When doing further examinations of the photographs taken and videos taken in the site, it's really shocking how we could see that some of these skeletons, human skeletons, still have the blindfolds around their skulls. Some of them still have the handcuffs, closed handcuffs around their basically the bones of their hands. They were buried in their full clothes and very superficially. And that reflects the degree of control the army feels they enjoy in Sinai, but also the lack of fear of any repercussions. The site has been fortified by 9 military posts around the mass grave, and Forensic Architecture did really amazing work analyzing satellite images of this site, a series of satellite images from 2005 until 2023. Basically, why the military chose that site? Because it was already a hole that was used until almost 2010 by locals to actually dig for soil. So it was already a hole, and the military used that to actually deepen the hole and introduce military fortifications around the site, and also they dug trenches around the site to basically hide it from the eyes of civilians. In this analysis, we have found in the report have found also not just this mass grave. The witnesses or the militia members also talked about a second site for a mass grave in North Sinai, but that one was not. The team members have not been able to visit the site because of military fortifications. The report also sheds lights on new incidents of extrajudicial executions that were not documented before. For example, in March 2016, the military in the middle of Sinai took or detained 2 children, 12-year and 13-year-old, from the Al-Ghul family, and they were found killed and covered superficially with sand just hours after their murder. Those were children, 12 and 13 years old. There are other incidents in the report that document extrajudicial executions. I think my time is up, but what I want to say is right to life is inherent. It cannot be subject to derogation. That also applies to times of crises and emergencies. It also applies to situations of armed conflict. People in Sinai and Egypt deserve the truth and justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amr. The crimes that have been and continue to be uncovered in Sinai testify the urgent need to uphold the rule of law and ensure accountability for grave violations perpetrated throughout Egypt in the name of counterterrorism. We will have one last speaker that will join us online before we listen to your comments and questions. Refreshments will be available after the event outside of the room.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Zidi, Advocacy Lead at Humina. My focus is the overlap between human rights defenders and the 3 freedoms that keep public life functional in Egypt today: peaceful assembly, association, and expression. I'll keep the recent practice and concrete examples. A fuller evidence base will appear in Humina's forthcoming report, Years of Siege, the State of Civic Space in Egypt, from 2019 to 2025, due next week. On peaceful assembly, notification frequently operates as de facto licensing. After the small September 2019 demonstrations, random street checks and curbside phone searches expanded within days, leading to large numbers of detentions. Around sensitive dates since then, modest time-limited gatherings have faced late route changes, broad public order vetoes, and security parameters that render local plans unworkable. Organizers, marshals, and legal observers are often the first to be pulled aside or told to observe from a distance, undermining the role that lower lists and keep protest management predictable. On association, compliance has not guaranteed its operating space. The November 2020 arrests of senior staff at the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights, days after a formal diplomatic briefing, sent a clear signal that registration, internal governance, and professional engagement do not necessarily insulate leadership. In routine operations, this looks like donor transfers held under review, venues, canceling on short notice following unofficial calls, and standard trainings reclassified to require prior permission. None of it as a formal ban, all of it effective obstruction. The experience of the Association for Freedom of Thought and Expression underscores the same point. Even organizations that register or apply for license encounter continuing constraints and oppression, including content blocking and administrative hurdles that stall programs and narrow public reach. On expression, new rules cases show structure rather than exception. In November 2019, Plainclothes officers entered Mada Masr, detained editors for hours, and released them after questioning. The outlet has repeatedly faced blocking windows since. In 2020, Al Manassa reported intermittent ISP level blocking alongside prior raids and staff questioning. Mirror links will function briefly and then go back, and then go dark. I apologize. Beyond individual newsrooms, network level blocking has persisted in recent years across independent media, civil society sites, and even circumvention tools, often without published orders. More recently, the independent outlet Zawiya 3 was also blocked. Around assemblies or sensitive reporting, takedowns and legal complaints move the fastest. Online speech becomes a gateway to street-level stops and device searches. A brief note on defenders themselves inside the country. Human rights defenders face layered scrutiny, summonses, travel bans, set measures, and rotation into new case numbers after release, creating continuous risk even without trial. Outside the country, of course, exiled human rights defenders face transnational repression used in a tactical manner by the Egyptian authorities. Online harassment, obstacles in consular paperwork and document renewal, and pressure through family members at home. In both spaces, we can notice that the engagement is chilled and the capacity to monitor, meditate, and report is reduced. Across recent files, the mechanics are consistent. Uncertainty is used as a tool. If organizers cannot know whether a notified assembly will proceed, if associations cannot know when lawful funds will be released, and if editors cannot know whether factual reporting will trigger complaints or blocking, self-limitation becomes rational. Pressure concentrates on safety roles, marshals, legal observers, documenters, and editors. The people who reduce risk are the first to be separated or targeted. Women defenders face additional exposure through intrusive searches and reputational smears. Information is fragmented, where verification matters most. Notices are acknowledged late or not at all. Conditions change without written reasons. Our recommendations as a HUMINA are: for the freedom of assembly, we establish the presumption of facilitation for peaceful, notified gatherings under the ACHPR guidelines with independent oversight so organizers, marshals, and monitors can operate safely. For the freedom of association, we ask to ensure non-discriminatory, time-bound, and reasoned decisions on registration and access to resources with an effective right to review so local civic work can proceed predictably. For the freedom of expression and of network level blocking of civic content, any restriction should meet legality, necessity, and proportionality tests and be subject to prompt independent review. These are standard-based steps, understandable to regional audience and immediately measurable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. From all the panelists, the message is clear. Human rights must not be a silent casualty of political partnerships. Egypt's record before this commission cannot be examined in isolation. It reflects a broader test for the African human rights system itself. The panelists have demonstrated that the Commission's 2019 recommendations remain largely unimplemented, while arbitrary detention, torture, economic deprivation continue to shape the daily lives of millions. And as the African Commission prepares to review Egypt's report, we urge African states to reaffirm that the African Charter on Human and People's Rights is not a declaration of intent, but a binding commitment.
So HRDs in the country, it has been a war of attrition war for against organizations. And so maybe back in 2011, when the revolt was happening, maybe we were 30, 40 organizations, fairly independent. Today we're maybe a handful of surviving organizations because it has been a war of attrition, assets freeze, travel bans, attacks on defenders, arrests. All these have led to crowding out essentially a lot of the independent organizations. Many organizations were able to be established in the diaspora with presence in Egypt as well and actions in Egypt. So now, yeah, the civil society or human rights defenders, individual defenders are the weakest link. So if you're a human rights lawyer, but you don't belong to an organization, you see what I mean? That's you're an easy target for arrest. If you're a researcher, like Ismail Iskandarani was arrested just after Alab Fatah was released. It's an easy target for the government. If you belong to an organization, it's a layer of protection. It's not enough, but it's a layer of protection than individual activists. And I agree with you. Yes, the economic situation is such that that was one of the reasons why Egyptian people have revolted. Inequalities, grievances, social and economic grievances, and they are on the rise in Egypt. Well, on the question of land, land is state ownership mainly. So in the Nile Valley, rural farmland are mostly private ownership, mostly. Okay, but the rest of the country, it's desert land, it's public property of the state. Okay, and that means that if you want to build a house in a desert area, in a slum, you need to get authorization of the state. Obviously, people don't wait for authorization. They need to live. They need to grow their families, and so they build informal settlements. Manshet, Nasir, Haggana, so many, and in Alexandria, same, and everywhere in the same. And according to the Egyptian civil code, a government, by direct orders of the executive, local authorities can remove any infringements on state-owned property, and that's those lands, which means that it's easy to evict and forcibly demolish the houses of the poor, and that's how it is happening. So land ownership is state controlled, very much so, and access to land is very difficult for people to establish commerces. They do it, but this is going against the law, and they may lose on their business or their investment or their house. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just touch of this your question about the economic rights. So actually, we keep our eyes about what happens in Nepal and Morocco from this protest that led by the Gen Z and actually driven by this economic and social demands. And actually, we are worrying actually that something similar maybe will happen in the future. As Mohammed said in the beginning, that actually the Egyptian government actually haven't fulfilled its commitment, its constitutional commitments of this public spending on the education and health. So and actually in the opposite, actually they keep investing and implementing its mega projects, even there is kind of advices from IMF or other physical institutions to slow down this kind of projects. So actually, it's very worrying. And in terms of your question, also the second part regarding the Gulf investments in Egypt. So actually, not only the Gulf countries, but also other countries which shifted from this unconditional support to the government, which increased after 2013, and actually shifted now to conditional support, benefiting of course for this the economic crisis that happened in Egypt, and also the deterioration of the currency value. Actually, so far there is no exact numbers or statistics, but we can we see this increasing pattern of accusation of this kind of profitable governmental companies and also private companies, which lead actually unfortunately the talented and skilled persons actually to leave the government. To leave the country. So we'll see what will happen in the future, but yeah, we are worrying a lot. Thanks.
We'll have our last comment by our last speaker, and then Unfortunately, we'll have to leave the room in 5 minutes, but we can continue our discussions outside with refreshments.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, very brief comments because one of the attendees here mentioned Mubarak, and of course, under Mubarak, Egypt was also not a democracy, but there's no way of comparison between the sheer oppression under Sisi and what was under Mubarak. Under Mubarak, no one was abducted from home and disappeared because of a Facebook post. I remember back then I was a university student. We were going into university marches, sometimes going out of campus, and we could feel safe to go back home after those protests. Now everyone going to a protest in Egypt knows they will either be killed or arrested. The sheer oppression under Sisi is only, I think, comparable to perhaps some Latin American countries under military junta in the 80s. It's not even comparable to the communist oppression in Eastern Europe in the 60s or 50s. We are really under severe oppression, and there's complete annihilation of all civil liberties and the civic space. For the colleague who raised the issue of awareness, I want to, of course, awareness campaigns are always welcome, but Egyptian people are not lacking awareness. You cannot talk about a population that actually millions of people took to the streets in very brave revolution in 2011, and again for 2 years were marching and facing death and prison in order to defend their liberties. Until now, very brave Egyptians, like those people sitting next to me, are speaking up despite the extreme prices they pay from their own security and their families' security. We are talking about tens of thousands of people who've been taken to prison. We are talking about most of the Egyptian civil society and political activists.
Our session ended. We look forward to discussing with you outside of the room. Thank you so much.